Let's get into it. Let's get into it. 1, 2, 3.
Well, hello, and welcome to My Whiskey Den, your favorite public access whiskey review show where craft whiskey is king. And tonight we are talking to Brian Cushing about some fantastic cocktails he makes. But they're a period cocktail. What are we talking about? I'm enjoying it so much because it takes us back in time, and we all have history on this channel. And he has started his own new channel, the Victorian Barroom. And if you haven't checked it out, we've posted a couple of videos. You should go check them out. They are way more, they're better done than our channel. Let's just be honest. I mean, there's no qualms about that. You know, there's way more effort put into it. And they fantastic. I'm sorry it is. I got mad at editing, and everyone knows that. I make that well known that there was a time period where I got mad at editing. I'm okay with it now, but But Brian, thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. And if you haven't, take a second and hop on over to the channel, subscribe, because there's some fantastic content coming out over there.
I really appreciate that, guys, and thanks for having me.
Yep. All right. So now since your channel is the Victorian Barroom, and even right now you are dressed a little period. When did you start your love of like reenactment of historical time periods and stuff like that? Because I think that really is what takes you to another level besides just the knowledge you have, is actually, you know, being in love with the period you're discussing.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that really started, I guess I was probably in the neighborhood of like 9 or 10 or so, or somewhere between there and 12, when history just started to it started to become a thing not just to read about, but that I wanted to like experience, you know. And it took a while to get to the point that, you know, I knew the people, I knew the resources and things like that to make that happen. But, you know, early on, it really struck me as something to be experienced. And then you go along and you fall in with like different reenacting groups and stuff like that, and meet a lot of great people along the way. But I think for a lot of us, it takes a while to really figure out what part of history it is that's really clicking with us. You know, it's like, it's not, you start doing different things, and it turns out it's not just about being old timey. For a lot of us, there is a very specific point in time that we're just drawn to it. And people can stand around and argue about why theirs is good and this and that, the other thing. But at the end of the day, usually there's a certain point in time that a lot of us who do this are drawn to. And for me, it was really the whole expanse of the Victorian period, which ranges from 1837 to 1901. It was a long period. And so, yeah, I've had a lot of awesome adventures along the way. I've done stuff with the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812, and first person interpretation and all that kind of thing. And but this has just been, I really feel like I've settled into home kind of with this.
Nice. And I know we did say we were going to be drinking cocktails this evening, and I don't want to get everyone all riled up in the chat. So let's start with one of the two that you wanted to make this evening, and we'll kind of cut back into the interview in a minute.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to start with the Fancy Whiskey Smash. And this is from 1895, and so it's really the tail end of the period. You could even say that we're even kind of cresting over into what we would think of as the classic era of cocktails at this point. But it's still solid foot in the Victorian period, and it's really easy too. And so I like to do one like this for everybody, because what I want everybody to come away with this knowing is that you can do it. You know, it's not magic. You can do this yourself. You know, I think part of the reason it took me so long to get around to it is because people just say things and it gets in your head and talk about how hard it is and it's impossible to read that stuff and everything. But then eventually you realize it's all the people who didn't achieve it who are saying all that. So I'm telling you, you can do it. And so we're going to start off with one that's very, very easy, very accessible tonight. It's going to start with a tumbler. This one's from around the 1880s, but you know, anyone will do. We'll get 2 teaspoons of sugar, And you can do simple syrup, but honestly, I think there's just something kind of lost in translation if you do. But it's fine. So 2 teaspoons of sugar. 2 tablespoons of just regular room temperature water. And we're just going to take a moment of patience and just stir it up until that's nice and dissolved. It's important to do this step first because if you don't, it's like if you get it too cold first, it doesn't want to dissolve. If you get alcohol in there first, it doesn't want to dissolve. So even if the recipe doesn't say to do it in this order, usually I just go ahead and dissolve the sugar in the water. Okay. So next, we'll just take some mint leaves in a bowl, and we're just going to give them a good crush.
I realize Mike's the one who's going at it over there mixing.
Well, I've got 2 of them. I'm making 2 at a time.
I should have done that because I need to have another one ready to go here in a second too. My wife is sitting over here. She was nice enough to let me use her computer because mine is awful.
Oh.
Okay. Now the recipe says like so many stalks of mint, but it's going to depend on how big your mint is. So I'm going to say just put enough in there so that it's nice. You've got something to kind of extract, that mint flavor, but it's not going to take over your drink. And so that I found is pretty good. And after that, we're going to put our ice in it. So this will be just like some crushed ice. So there. That'll do. Now we're going to take our whiskey and we're going to put 2 ounces over the top. And this is the neat thing about these cocktails. These days, we're very into you use this for that and this, that, the other thing. During this period, whiskey usually wasn't the star of the show as far as your mixed drinks go. I mean, it's certainly in there, but it's usually not your prime choice. And sometimes they do tell you what sort to use, but a lot of times, like in both of the recipes we're going to do tonight, they just say whiskey. Okay, so you are free to kind of play around with whatever it is you might want to do. And I think I just kind of did a selection here. And I think tonight we're going to do we're going to do Mewgladden. Okay, yep. So,
Nice.
This is a high rye bourbon. Alan Bishop at Spirits of French Lick makes this. If I'm in doubt, I use some of his stuff usually.
Who is that?
His name's Alan Bishop. You might have heard of him.
No.
We like his stuff.
Mike and Patrick, what are you guys using for this one?
For cocktail number 1, I'm using a Good Time single barrel pick that was finished in peach barrels and then chocolate barrels.
Oh, nice.
And then I'm doing a second one that is a Chattanooga apricot brandy finish.
Oh, you're going fancy.
Oh,
I'm doing Wood Hat Spirits, Montgomery County. The first one they released this year that was all Missouri.
Okay.
Everything. So I'm going to start with that one. We'll see how that goes, and we'll jump into maybe something that's got a little more kick and flavor after this next one.
Yeah,
the Leopold brothers. This one.
All right, so we're just going to give this a mix. You'll see it's kind of a cousin of the mint julep. Now, this is the other neat thing about these is, they didn't have Kroger, they didn't have access to the same fruit all year round. So a lot of times they just say to use whatever fruit's in season. And of course, today we can pretty much have whatever we want, and we happen to have like a little bit of citrus in the fridge. So we're just going to garnish with a little bit of that. Always goes well. And a straw, and you're ready to go.
Beautiful.
Okay, I'm making mine a little weird, and I'm actually garnishing both of mine with a strawberry.
That's perfect.
There you go.
Yeah.
A little mint, blueberry, and cherries going on this one.
Ooh.
I got mine delivered to me. I think I might start making this like a thing. I'm really
You don't even
enjoying
know
it.
what it is.
It could be, but there's some blackberries, and I see the mint in here, and
You think they're blackberries?
It's Fireball.
Oh man!
Fireball.
Not to say he wouldn't do that either, too. Ooh, damn, that's tasty. And
Oh, wow.
And you can tell I think the real sugar versus the simple syrup is just on the taste alone. Like right now, and here is a big difference. And yes, John, hold on here, John.
Yeah, that's on point, especially for summertime sipping.
Exactly. We tested these out on the porch.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, nice. There's I just have a dead spot in my finger tonight.
Oh, wow.
I was painting, and some of the clips don't want to come up. But no, this is fantastic for what it is here.
It's kind of a julep cousin, isn't it?
Yeah, but I like this significantly better than I like mint juleps.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
I am not actually a big mint julep fan. I think this kind of the sweeter part of this, or maybe he didn't use as many mint leaves, but it plays really well together. It's scary because I can see this going down in like 2 really easy big drinks.
Yeah, that's one of the problems. They made it very approachable. And I passed that one off to Amy, so I'm making me another one.
Yeah.
And yeah, it really, I mean, between the mint and the sugar in here, because the whiskeys that I picked for this one, they're both high proof,
Right.
and it is very well hidden in here. But the strawberry was just on a whim to throw that on there, and that's the first time I've decided to throw a strawberry in a cocktail.
Yeah.
I'm digging it pretty good.
I think that's a really good choice. A lot of these, they'll say fruit and berries in season. And so when I've put a little bit, when I've got them around, we tend to play with like strawberries and blackberries and things like that in a lot of these drinks. It's a nice presentation. It does a nice thing for it. And there's an episode coming up that we're going to do that's a Kirschwasser punch. And the longer that it sits and the berries just kind of soak up that alcohol in the bottom, the nicer it is.
Nice.
But yeah, blackberries and things like that go really well with that.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Oh wow!
So now we are properly off and running.
I'll say this: cheers, guys. The Leopold plays really nice with this as well. I mean, that's 100 proof, his bottled in bond, and it's the kind of the high malt character on that one is coming through with this mint and the fruit really nice.
Great.
And you're using the bourbon, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, me and Alan one day we had a discussion about high rye bourbon in the 19th century, and I think the answer is nobody really knows. And before 1962, it wasn't a legally defined category, and especially in the 19th century, prior to Prohibition and all that, you're talking about just a cultural definition. So there wasn't really. It was a corn-heavy Kentucky whiskey that was aged in barrels, basically. So the chances that a bunch of rye did find it in there sometimes are pretty good.
Nice.
You guys are gonna have to hold on. I gotta fix my camera. I'll be back in a second.
So, Brian, what's I mean, you're hitting the Victorian period here, and for me, that's really I guess what I looked into, cocktails weren't really defined until around early 1800s.
Mm-hmm.
So you're in a very formative period of this,
Right.
of seeing cocktails come along up until the end of the 19th century. So, kind of take us through a little historical progression. What do you see as steps or processes how this has developed and come along through that time period?
Well, it all started with punch. And punch was still reigning supreme when the Victorian period kicked off. Not that there weren't individual drinks, but for more than 100 years, going back into the 17th century, people had been using punch to make distilled spirits into something that was nice and palatable to drink. It was the early stages of that too, and so the results could be mixed. I think sometimes people probably overstate how bad it was. I think it was probably like it is today. I mean, we all know some some people with some home equipment, some pretty basic stuff that could make it, better than you can in a commercial distillery. And it was the same then, but you did have a lot of people where the learning curve was pretty steep. And so by the end of the 18th century, you start to see these very simple individual drinks. That's basically some sugar, some water, some spirit, and all that. And then in the United States, especially, this individual portion really started taking off, and it did. The exchange overseas was always pretty quick, but they would even, like over in England, they would have their own mixology manuals and things like that, and they would have a section called American style drinks. They recognized this as an American thing that was going on, and I think what you really see when these really start taking hold, like by the time Jerry Thomas writes his amazing manual, bartender's manual in 1862, which in my opinion is still one of the best. You really got to resist the urge when you're doing this not to just be a Jerry Thomas scholar, but you're seeing this really take hold at the same time when the pace of life in general is quickening. And it doesn't look that way to us because we're so used to things being so much faster. We've got the internet, we've got automobiles and all this, but you think about, you had a world that moved either on human or horsepower, for millennia, for all of human history. And then all of a sudden, by the early 19th century, you've got a steamship coming down the Ohio River. The first I live in Kentucky. First steamship came down here in 1811. By 1815, they were steaming both ways. That changed the whole way people related to life. And then by the time you get just a little bit further, you've got the railroad. And that changed the world forever. And so you start to see the pace of life quickening, and you start to, and that's when these individual portions, start to take off. There's no more time to sit around with your buddies around a punch bowl for God knows how long. You get your portion, you have it, and you're on your way. And I think you see that kind of that trend in a lot of different corners of life at that time.
Cool.
Did that answer the question, or did I go off on a tangent?
Doesn't matter.
Both. I don't know. Great. So I have a question. Given that spirits are different now, and not just the spirits, but I mean a lot of the ingredients are different now. How hard has it been for you to come up with either substitutions or additions or subtractions to make it period perfect?
It depends. It's a case by case kind of thing, and in some cases, the answer is we'll never know. It's like, well, to bring up Alan again, it's like he always says, you can give the same recipe to two different distillers, even now, and it'll come out completely differently. There are more than one distillery that makes like George Washington's rye whiskey recipe. It all comes out different. And so as careful as we are, part of the truth is we'll never really know. What I can say is, it's a lot easier now than it was 20 years ago. There's a lot more out there on the market. Like one thing that we'll be visiting with the Manhattan later on is Bokers Bitters. You can make these yourself, and bartenders even did back then too. But this was a very popular style of bitters in the mid to late 19th century, died out in the early 20th. But people have gone in and they've reformulated it. They've actually packaged it and selling it. We've got, if you don't want to make your own gum syrup, somebody asked me about a commercial version. So, I've been working with this stuff just to kind of see how it works. You can actually buy gum syrup when most people these days are just using simple syrup. And then there's the author, David Wondrich, who you really can't say enough about his contribution to our understanding of spirits and how they were used. He's actually gone in and consulted distilleries on reproducing correct spirits, because he went on the journey of trying to find this stuff and how impossible it was. And so one of the neatest things that I've worked with, I think, is Ransom Old Tom Gin that he helped formulate, and I'm pretty confident from everything I've read and from his account and all that this is about as close as you're going to get to a 19th century Old Tom Gin as you're going to get. And so from there, a lot of it is guesswork. Rye is one thing I shy away from using because I really don't feel like I've wrapped my mind around the difference. I know it's huge between modern rye and 19th century rye. And that's something I'm just really still working on. And then you get into bourbons, which, here in Kentucky, we love them. They weren't huge on the mixology scene at that point. But there's such a huge variance in what a bourbon can be now. And it was even huger then, you had even more factors in play then. And so it's there's just so many variables there that in my opinion, the best way to do it is jump in, have fun with it, keep reading, keep researching. Yeah, you're going to find out that this thing I did last month was completely wrong. It's okay. You had fun doing it and you'll keep learning. So
it's all about the journey here.
Right.
Yeah. So speaking of journey, what got you started in mixology in the first place?
It was like everybody else, honestly. It was honestly prohibition. That's kind of how a lot of people get into cocktails. It's like the mystique of prohibition, and there's the glamour of classic Hollywood and everything. And so I think actually the first thing I did was I had bought a house that was built in 1920. And so, like I said at first, it's like I'm a history geek. I always got to go in and recreate the factors and stuff. So it's like, well, we're going to have a party that's exactly like it's 1920, okay? And it's prohibition, and I'm going to learn to make a martini. And that was the first one I ever, learned to make. And so I started that with that kind of fascination, not really even realizing there was this whole other world before at that time. That was, I guess, 10, 11, 12 years ago, something like that. And it was fun, and mostly I did martinis, for a long time. That was kind of my go-to. And then when I met my wife, actually, she was also kind of into spirits and all that. But we lived on different sides of the country. I actually lived in New Albany, Indiana, and she lived in San Francisco, California. But one of the things we could do together was we could figure out, cocktails and stuff over what was it, Skype? So we started doing some of this together and figured out these different things. And so, yeah, I didn't really, it was a while before I broke into the Victorian side because the classic world loomed so large, but it kind of gotten to the point I was tapped out with how interested I was. I felt like I was drinking a lot of citrus and liquor, and I was looking for something different. And that's when I finally decided I was just going to jump into Jerry Thomas, the first bartender's manual. It's like all of a sudden this whole other world opened up that was completely different than the martini and the Manhattan as we think of them today. And we just really got off and running on this. And eventually it's like, well, we've got to tell other people about it.
It's neat when you find something that like triggers you like that.
What's that?
It's just neat when you find something that triggers you when you're researching, and it's like, I don't want to call it like an epiphanous moment, but like you find something and it just triggers and hits home with you, and you're like, why haven't I heard about this? Like, why aren't more people talking about what's going on here? Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mike. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh no, you're fine. I had a question about this cocktail before we get too far. Mm-hmm. So when you started with it, what was your reasoning for doing sugar than water versus just doing a homemade simple syrup?
For me, the process is always important. And so it's like I've learned along the way with all kinds of different historic skills that it's you got to take it step by step. And no matter how much time it takes, it'll get quicker as you go. But 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, maybe it's like when you're trying to do something, whether it's cooking, whether it's sewing or mixology, it's like when something went wrong and you go back and start retracing your steps, it's like, I thought I was going to cut a corner there and it didn't work out so well. And so when I started into these recipes, I wanted to, because part of the thing is you're going to screw up one way or the other, no matter how careful you are. So I always figure it's like, well, let's take it as carefully as we can, step by step. Mm-hmm. So as much as we can get right, we do get right. And so that's why I just never really even did try simple syrup as a substitute, because I wanted to be sure that I was doing it as it was meant to be. And then I really liked the result. And then as far as making sure I put the mixing of the sugar in the water at the beginning, that was a lesson hard learned. That I spent a long time trying to mix some sugar and alcohol one time, and it just never really happened. So it was a lesson I just never forgot.
Oh, I'm enjoying the heck out of these. This is great.
Great.
It's fantastic.
Everyone was mentioning unbleached sugar is better for cocktails. That just sounds like that would be accurate. I mean, bleaching something just doesn't sound like it should be good for a
Yeah.
cocktail in general.
No, by the time you get into the Victorian period too, it's like, yeah, that's from a craft standpoint, that's probably true. But you also had, some bleached, refined stuff at that point. So they actually refer to it as powdered sugar in the recipes, and powdered, they're probably getting mostly at like granular.
Okay.
Sure.
So what's been one of the toughest as far as a learning curve or just understanding the processes of Victorian era cocktails that you've had to pick up on or learn or try to translate?
The biggest thing is the measurements.
Okay.
And it's once you've got it, you've got it. But like they measure things, like we said, 2 ounces tonight for this drink. But a lot of times they measure it in wine glasses.
Mm-hmm.
And so that throws people a lot of times when they first start, because, for us, a wine glass is like a globe,
Right. Right.
But for them, I've got one here somewhere. Hang on. So this is a Victorian wine glass. That's from early in like maybe 1860s, probably not later into 1890s. But that's, if you can see, that's how big what they considered a wine glass. What we call this, the Victorians, is a goblet. Okay, so there's the difference. And so for me, I had some originals of these, a variety of originals from kind of throughout the period sitting around. And so I literally one day I just lined them all up and I measured them in ounces, how much they were. And most of them clocked in right around 2 ounces. And then I didn't even realize David Wondrich, he actually had a whole conversion chart. He also had measured them at 2 ounces. So I felt pretty good about that. And so when I do this stuff these days, when we're doing the show and all that, we if they say a wine glass, I make sure to tell people it's 2 ounces, not a big globe of liquor, and then kind of walk them through the different ways that you can measure 2 ounces if you don't have like bartending equipment there. So that's the big thing is the way they stated those things. When you see a jigger, quote unquote, at the end of the period, that's probably more like 1.5 ounces,
Okay.
stuff like that. So that was kind of the biggest. Once you decode that part, everything kind of gets easier.
That's almost like what we call a cordial glass today.
Exactly.
Size-wise. Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
it's not that they weren't drinking a lot of wine; they just refilled.
Right. I was going to say also too, especially higher society working through multiple courses on a meal, you see them having a separate wine with each course. And you sit there and wonder, how were they not sloshed by the end of the meal? Well, they're not drinking portions like we were today, but then, yeah, I've also heard they usually were only taking a few sips and then on to the next thing. So I guess it just depends on the individual too, but.
Well, that goes into what we were talking about technology quickening the pace of life and changing everything. Because at the beginning of the period, a formal dinner was still a very long, drawn-out, leisurely affair. I mean, it could go on for hours. And the prevailing custom in those days was actually that the guest chose what sort of wine that they drank. And so it wasn't necessarily you had a formal pairing, that just anything was supposed to be available and you had access to it at that point. And so that would go on for a while. And then there would be the separation of the ladies to the parlor. The tablecloth comes out, the men sit around with port, for a while.
Yeah.
By the end of the period, that's when like servants are looming over you constantly, and maybe the pairings are a little bit more rigid, and suddenly guys really aren't hanging around doing port. It's like you rush off to the parlor and you have coffee, which sounds grim to me. I don't want coffee after supper.
Right. I don't know. I love a good espresso after a good dinner sometimes, but then I move on to the whiskey or cocktail or whatever I'm going to have.
Just trying to keep yourself awake after the meal.
There you
What's
go.
going on?
Yeah.
Oh man. So I do find that interesting though, because I know in just my own studies, studying a lot on George Washington, his customs of the time, the big meal for them was lunch. They prepare a huge lunch, and that would carry over for a while. And then I think later in the evening, he would basically pour a glass of Madeira and munch on some nuts or something like that. That was dinner.
Yeah. When you're talking about like formal dinners and stuff at the beginning of the Victorian period, it was probably kicking off like at 4 p.m. or so.
Right.
And then again, it's like you get that quick pace of life, you get all that business going on, rushing around. Suddenly you can get places in the dark, which you really couldn't before. And so that's when dinner starts starting really late.
Yeah.
And moving pretty quickly.
Has there been any ingredients you've had a hard time sourcing or trying to figure out from some of these recipes you've encountered?
Yes. And there's it just winds up, I kind of table it sometimes. And then just kind of come back to it when I can. There's a recipe I really want to try, and it has you doing a tablespoon of vanilla. And I know that's not vanilla extract.
Okay.
It's, I'm thinking it's got to be a vanilla syrup, but I just like little things like that they just kind of mention offhand that, it just takes a while to dig in and be sure that you found the right thing that you're looking for. I'm trying to think. I know there's some others. I've got a bunch of flags and different, but yeah, you'll come up with like a syrup that you don't know how to make. You can't find it, stuff like that. A lot of times it's not necessarily the spirits, but the other things that you're supposed to be throwing into it. Borage was a big one. That was it was used in claret cups, which is kind of like a nice kind of summer picnicky kind of jug of wine concoction. And luckily, eventually, my wife just grew some borage, and so we tried it, last weekend, and it was really delightful. So it's cool. Like all those things that were common then, and you can still get, but it's just kind of the challenge of getting at it. You get into some things too, like Curacao. If they say Curacao in a recipe, what we have labeled as a Curacao is really more of a 20th century thing. There's kind of like a list of different things that are still available that you can use that are like what they were calling Curacaos, just not anymore. And that's why I usually just kind of settle on a Grand Marnier because it was in that realm for them and it's readily accessible. But totally different from what we think of as a Curacao.
That's true. When I was picking some up today, I thought that because I lean that way over the absinthe, which was an option.
Right.
Sorry, they know. I don't know if you watched the show or not, but you all giggled like you knew about my issues with anise and stuff like that. So well, it was an easy choice.
I always go for the absinthe because I love a dash of absinthe in anything.
Yeah. I've become a big fan of absinthe lately myself, and been sharing it a lot and making a lot of converts to it here recently. It's been interesting getting people's reactions to it and just seeing how much. Oh, I had no idea how good this was. But
yeah, well, you and me were on that absinthe show a few months back, weren't we?
That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The absinthe is really. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say that was kind of probably just right before that was when I was really starting to get into it some, and it's just that doorway for me has been blown wide open. As a matter of fact, my brother-in-law is in Switzerland this week and supposed to be bringing back some bottles from over there. So
very nice.
Looking forward to that.
Well, absinthe is such a neat thing in the Victorian period because it was present the whole time. Right? Again, from Jerry Thomas, it's like he's writing about absinthe. And, Alan and me have been working on a project with Musée des Vinoges and Historic Locust Grove and Kentucky Arts and Distillery trying to recreate an 1830s absinthe that he found in Switzerland County, Indiana. So being produced right here. But then when that blight happened, that wiped out the grape crop and wine wasn't happening. And so they started using absinthe, all of a sudden at the same time in the mixology manuals, absinthe is just everywhere. By the 1880s, they were putting absinthe in everything. And it's really neat. And so it's like, I'm kind of purposely on the show. We've got an absinthe episode coming up, but I'm not even really doing the classic dripping thing and all that, because there's plenty of guides to that. And there's all this other stuff that people were doing with absinthe that people just don't think about because it was lost for so long. It was illegal for really no reason. But it's like one of my favorites. One of my favorites I almost did on the show tonight, but it was just a little bit too abstract, was there was one of the manuals from the 1880s that you can do brandy and absinthe, whiskey and absinthe, gin and absinthe. And all they do is they put a bar spoon of absinthe in a glass, they hand you the bottle of whiskey, and they give you a glass of water. And you take it from there.
You could have done that. I think that's a good half an hour, 45 minutes into the show drink.
That'll offset your espresso really nice.
I will say this, for me, absinthe has totally changed the way I look at cocktails now, because it used to be when I'd go out to a bar or restaurant, it's straight to a whiskey cocktail. Give me a Manhattan, give me an old fashioned. Now I'm scanning the menu and I'm seeing what has absinthe in it. And that's usually my first go-to, some kind of absinthe and mezcal or whatever other, combination they've got going. And that's become like, okay, that's my first drink for the night, because the flavors are just amazing.
Oh yeah. Well, and there was one, it's like, I always wonder if I should do it or not on the show, but there was an Italian cafe when me and Amy lived in old Louisville. They had the perfect, oh no, I'm sorry, that wasn't absinthe. It was green chartreuse. Sorry, off topic, but it was chartreuse, bourbon, and sweet vermouth.
Okay.
In mint. And it was just the most wonderful thing. I think I've retro engineered it, but it's like, I guess I can't really talk about that on a Victorian show.
No, but we could talk about that after the show. There you go.
Yeah. Speaking of Victorian show, tell us a little bit about what you're doing with the Victorian Barroom and kind of maybe where you're planning to go with all this.
Oh, great. Yeah, thanks. We decided to do this partway through last year because we had discovered these Victorian cocktails, or I call them cocktails. Cocktails was actually a much more narrow term for them. So these mixed beverages that the Victorians were doing that just had such a different character from anything that I ever knew, and that seemed like a lot of people ever knew. And the more, it's like Amy and me, we would experiment with them, and the more we got into them, the more we just really loved this world. It was a whole new world. And I think the one that really clinched it for me, that was like, okay, this is a life mission now, was Jerry Thomas's Brandy Sangaree, made with Old Clifty Hoosier apple brandy. And it's like drinking velvet is the best way I can put it. It was just the most wonderful thing I ever drank. So I think that's what really, set me on the path of, okay, this is a really good idea. And I was the program director at Locust Grove in Louisville at the time, and I was actually able to take some of this to work because we were doing different. We had the small farm distillery project started up, so we do some like alcohol centered programs, and then I was working on this stuff at home, and sometimes I would actually get to take the stuff I worked on at home and do it at work, and we would even do some videos about it there and all that. But it was a lot of times it was kind of off of what our real focus was, the core interpretation there was 1809 to 1822. And it's like, I'm really pushing from the 1860s through the end of the century. And so that's when we really started thinking about, it's like, well, why don't we do a show where we're really doing the Victorian period and all that. And this is going to sound really roundabout, but really what I'm really interested in mostly is the agricultural side of spirits. And especially apples. And that's the funny thing. It's like, if I'm researching like agriculture, like, or making alcohol or something like that, I'm likely to think about cider and brandy. But when I reach for a drink, I'm likely to reach for beer or whiskey. So, but it's like, I really wanted to kind of pursue this heritage apple thing, and, produce for its own sake with a small farmer doesn't really work all that well these days. And so it's like, well, that was another thing. It's like, I've got to start establishing something else, that actually has an identity that people might have an interest in. And so, the produce might not get you a ton of money, and this probably won't either, but it's like, at least maybe if we reach out and show people what to do with this stuff and how to get to what the Victorians were doing with the final product. Maybe we entertain them a little bit along the way. Then maybe people will care, and we can carve out the cornerstone of a brand. And so that's kind of what we're doing. I think we got 2 episodes left that we've got to really film. So there's like 8 in the can. And so we did that deliberately, so we didn't just start and stop a whole lot. And so like right out of the gate, it's like we released the first episode, seemed like there was some energy, so we just dropped another one the next week, and then it was 2 weeks after that. And so then I'm working on editing this next one. But basically it's, we're doing the best we can, and just kind of trying to have some fun with it, and hopefully bring other people along to have some fun with us. Let them know that they can do it, help them to discover this world, and part of the reason this edit is taking so long is we're hoping to also highlight some Victorian sites, like some of these historic homes.
Mm-hmm.
And I still work in history. And so it's like, I know how important it is to kind of get the word out and get people excited about these places, because it's not good business. People have to care in order for these places to survive. And so that's what I'm working on right now with this next episode that I'm hoping is out by the end of the week. We went to the Conrad Caldwell House Museum in Louisville, Kentucky. That's been really good to us. They're a wonderful Victorian castle almost, and so we did a little tour of the house. We explored Chartreuse, and hopefully we'll go back next season and we'll explore more of the house and delve deeper into Chartreuse. And so that's kind of all the different arms of this thing. We're not taking it in chronological order. We're just kind of trying to have fun with it and bring other people along and have fun with us.
Well, was part of it that I liked, is that you were going to some very historic places when you were filming and doing some of the stuff. And I was just impressed by that. And I was wondering how easy or tough was it to gain access to do that? I mean, obviously you're doing the right things by trying to, tell people about it as it's going on, but I can still see some people, having stuff from an era you get stuff people from an era or something from that time period. Sometimes people are very protective of it or their space.
Right. Well, it's been kind of the world I've been navigating for a while, both, in my private life and for work, really. And so a lot of these were contacts we kind of had, and we've worked with these sites before is the thing. And so they already know that we're not just somebody coming and screwing around and causing damage to the place. That we're actually on board with being professional and doing this right. And so Conrad Caldwell House, we've done different programs for them before, so they already knew us. Amy actually worked there briefly at one point, and so they were known to us. And there's some other sites that we're looking at exploring in the next season that again we've helped them out with events and stuff. We've worked with them. They've kind of been out to sites we were working with. We've been out to their site, and so we kind of have these relationships formed at this point. And so that makes it easier than to make that leap and go in there and do these projects.
Cool. So you mentioned with the show bringing up about the apples and the produce and everything. When you're sharing history and we're doing a show like this, what is like this for you, the central message you want to communicate to people about history, about the Victorian time period?
Again, I think the big thing is if they come away with nothing else, I want them to know, honestly, whether it's this or something else they're interested into that seems difficult, maybe that you can do it. Mm-hmm. If it's something that you're interested in and you want to recreate it and you want to jump in and you want to make it happen, you can do it. The people who are telling you can't and it's hard and it's impossible, those are all people who didn't do it. Those are people that either tried and failed, or they repeated something that somebody told them, and they didn't do it. And so they're telling you can't do it, and that's not true. And so for me, the whole thing has been really recreating the whole kind of texture of this period, whether it's food, drinks, clothing, that whole thing. And so it's like, I guess for me, I want to help people to really experience that part of the period, what I would call the texture. I want them to taste history, to experience it in a sensory way, and I'm really glad if they come along and they do my part with me. Right. But then if that's not their thing, I hope they take that and they latch on to whatever is their thing, and they just do it and they have some fun with it. They experiment. And if you fall down, you get back up and you just try it again, and so that's what I hope people get is they experience some of this that I'm passionate about with me, and they can take that and they can go and explore further what they might be wanting to explore.
That's great. And I think that's something for me I've loved about your show so far, and just the times we've gotten to chat and even being on the Absinthe show, your passion for this really comes across intensely and in a great way. And for me, it's contagious. So
well, I appreciate that.
Yeah. So with that, you guys ready to get on to the second cocktail here?
Yes, I am.
Okay. My mind. Perfect.
Yeah. Let's drink.
Well, I want to say these blackberries are absolutely fantastic at the end.
Ooh.
After it all settles in and everything. Yeah. I've got a cat friend coming up. Okay.
You can come in.
This one is a little bit more involved, and I'll say this is one of the ones I've struggled with the most, as far as like getting it really good. And I think the real key is patience. Is really taking your time with it. And so this is a Manhattan cocktail recipe of 1888. And why I really like this one is that we can see change over time. In two different ways, actually, because I've talked a couple of times about how you've got this kind of Victorian era of mixology, and then you move into the classic era that we think of with the martini and the Manhattan and all that, like we're used to it. What this came from, this 1888 Mixology Manual, was written by a man named Harry Johnson, and he had several different versions of his manual. And him, to me, he's almost like the second Jerry Thomas. Everything he did was impeccable, and there were multiple editions of his book. Now, before that, there was an edition in 1882. And the one in 1882 read very much like Jerry Thomas did. It's a lot of the same recipes, kind of takes on the same recipes, very good takes, but you don't see names like Manhattan and Martini, okay? We get to that next edition in 1888, and time is moving on, and styles are moving on, and suddenly there's this early version of the Martini and the Manhattan. So we're starting to push into that classic era, but you'll see if you make it, we've still got a foot really firmly rooted in the Victorian period, okay? It's a Manhattan, but it's very much a Victorian Manhattan. All right, it's very rich, it's very round, and so to move into that, what we're going to do is the first thing. It says a couple of dashes of gum syrup, and again, somebody had asked me about places they could buy gum syrup on the channel a few weeks ago, and so we figured we'd pick some up and try it. Oh, my camera's moving in the opposite direction of me, and so if you can see that, we've had some pretty good luck with this stuff. We like it. You can make it too. A lot of times it includes gum arabic, but honestly, there are Victorian gum syrup recipes that don't include gum arabic, and so you just got to kind of dig for them. You can actually just make them with sugar and water. It says a couple of dashes of it, but it wasn't moving through my dasher. It's pretty thick, so I eventually realized that about half a teaspoon. If you can't dash it, half a teaspoon will get you where you're going. Put that in. Oh, also, I'm doing this in a mixer and having my tumbler standing by.
Once we get through this, I'm curious to ask you, what's some of the changes in the tools they used in mixing then versus now?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, we will talk about that. Next is, oh, by the way, also, if you're at home, you don't have gum syrup, simple syrup will work just fine. Don't not do it. Simple syrup will work. Our Bokers Bitters, all right, again, nice company has reformulated this stuff. You can also make it. It's easy to find recipes for it. If you don't have Boker's, Angostura will do just fine. Okay, so
I had ordered some Bokers for this, but it didn't get here in time. It's coming.
Oh, gotcha. We have fun when it gets here.
But, yep.
So just a couple of dashes of that. All right. Now the next is your choice. You can do a dash of Curacao, which I suggested you use Grand Marnier, or we can do Absinthe, and I am an Absinthe fan, and so it's 1888. Absinthe is everything, and I am using the Spirits of French Lick Absinthe Le Bleu tonight.
Yep.
I'm going to give it a good, healthy dash of Absinthe.
And Richard was just wondering, kind of like an orange brandy or an anise wormwood. He's kind of one of those little bit of a jump. Hey, you know, I like it because I like the orange brandy. I like the choice, but what between the two on those two? Just because they seem like they're a bit of a jump in profile.
What between the two? You mean? You said?
Mm-hmm.
That's a good question. Basically, you're delving into any of the period versions of Curacao that you might like. I mean, if you do a modern Curacao, it's not going to ruin it, but you're just not going to be getting that period experience. So honestly, I would look down kind of the list of the different versions that David Wondrich prescribes, and we can follow up on that later. Actually, if you like, I can send out a list.
Yeah, that's cool.
Now, the next, we're going to do a whole ounce of vermouth. Now, when I first started doing this, I was used to making a Manhattan with sweet vermouth. You know, that's how you do a classic Manhattan. It was disgusting. All right, there's too much vermouth in here. It's just overpowers it. And so we're going to use a dry vermouth. And if you use Dolan, that'll really make it nice. So an ounce, and if you don't have an ounce measure at home, a tablespoon is actually perfectly fine. I actually really like to use a tablespoon for this because I find this is one cocktail, if I eyeball it, it's probably going to go off.
Okay.
This has actually got to be really precise. So an ounce or 2 tablespoons of dry vermouth. And then we're going to do an ounce of whiskey. And that was something I was very much not used to. So we've got equal parts vermouth and whiskey in this. And when I did a classic Manhattan, I would always just like make the vermouth complement the whiskey, you know. But this actually has equal parts. And so since it's not much whiskey, it's equal with the vermouth, you want to choose something that is high proof and bold. Okay, you don't want a weak flavored whiskey in this, or it will just get lost. And tonight I have the Spirits of French Lick Unpretentious.
He's using it in a cocktail. It's my whiskey.
You're making people cry with joy.
I am. I'm crying over here.
Ordinarily I wouldn't put something of this in a cocktail, but this is the only one I had that had power behind it to make this work.
No, I'm just jealous. I do not have my bottle anymore. That's all.
We drove 2 hours to French Lick when Alan told us how much the aftermarket value was going.
well worth it. Did you sell a kidney to get it?
So we're just going to put a couple of ice cubes in there. And this is the really crucial part, is you want to take the time to really mix it and fill it nicely.
Kevin was just saying that
worth a smart card.
he said it was worth $7,000 since you poured in there.
Yep. I sold my firstborn for a bottle and still never got the bottle.
You're gonna have to talk to someone there now about it.
Yep.
All right, we're going to strain it into our little tumbler here. Okay. Now here's the finishing touch. You want to take a lemon, peel off just a strip of the yellow portion with as little pith as possible. So we got that. Fold it over. Take your beverage, squeeze it nicely over top. So you get a good dose of it on there. And get rid of it. You know, we're so used to garnishing drinks these days, it didn't always happen back then. But that is just going to have that kind of lemon essence settle really nicely on top. It's going to like just greet your nose as you start to drink it. And I'm just interested because you can tell it's a Manhattan, but it's so different. I'm interested to see what you guys think about it.
I snuck one of these in earlier just because I wanted to see what it tasted like.
You bastard.
Well, and you are exactly right. It has much more flavor than what your standard Manhattan does. And I think exactly what you said. It comes from the other flavors, not the whiskey, where today some people might be trying to push like the flavor of a whiskey through the Manhattan.
Right.
And this is all the other flavors, and I'm finding this extremely enjoyable. It's light. It's had a little bit of herbal and fruitiness to it.
I love what this lemon is doing with the absinthe that's in there.
So you did the absinthe too?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Nice. It's like everything else the Victorians made. It's sweet. It's rich, and it will fill you up. Honestly.
It's really layered with a lot of flavors in here too.
Yeah.
And mine is just on the edge of like a dessert drink. You know, like you were saying, rich and layered. And I'm like, I can see this maybe during the meal, but I'm like, I can also see it cross over. But it's just light. And of course, mine's got a little more of the ice kind of fade away into it. But I just think it's got a little bit of that right on the edge of it. Kind of can do both things.
Yeah, it's and what you were saying too about all the other flavors working together. I think that really is correct because I mean, when I made a Manhattan before, I loved Manhattans. Like classic Manhattan was probably my favorite drink. But when I did it with the mindset of just complementing the whiskey. The whiskey is an ingredient in this broader beverage. And so we can see here the moment we start to crest from the Victorian period into our classic cocktail period these days.
What has been one of the most interesting ones you've seen, like as you had it, like it's progressed? Is there one you've seen where like you would have stopped it and wished it hadn't progressed?
You know, well, the thing is, so much of it just gets left behind. And so much of it in that period was just such a different animal from what we're left with now. That to me, it's a whole different ballgame. It's not even the same thing. And so really the Martini and the Manhattan, those are two of the only ones that I've seen that you really see this starting Victorian and becoming classic. And I'm sure there's more out there. It's like I haven't really focused as much on the 1890s. But all in all, it's just two different experiences. And honestly, if I'm reaching for a drink in the evening, reaching for a drink in the evening, usually it's bourbon and soda. You know, we have a blast doing all this mixing stuff. When the day's over, a lot of times I just want to sit and have a drink and not think too much about it. But I would.
I respect the honesty in that because it happens a lot of times. Everybody is like, "Nope, I'm done with my job for the day."
But honestly, it's like I love a classic Manhattan. You know, I like the direction it went, but it's been so neat to discover this side of it.
So I was asking you earlier. Go ahead.
Nope. I was just trying to get Mike's thoughts down there. He was mixing two at a time. He's double-fisted and he's being quiet.
Right.
So what the hell is going on?
You gotta clean things out and gonna go. No, I got them both made and I just sampled the first one. I like what that lemon's doing, and especially I like the lemon, and I used absinthe as well, but I like what that lemon's doing with the absinthe.
Yep. I'll say Mike's just getting quietly sauced down there.
Yeah, he's not saying anything the whole episode. Right. He's just getting hammered.
He's a quiet drunk, and all of a sudden you're going to see just fall out of the chair at the end of the show.
I went two different ways too. So because I like a Manhattan with a high rye or a rye, so I made one of these with I got Old Overholt 114 because I figured that would be close to an old rye.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But then the other one is Bloody Butcher Red from single barrel pick from Wood Hat, which gives it a totally different flavor too.
Yeah.
And it's, on the nose, holy crap. I mean, I was really surprised because I thought this could go very south with the absinthe and that Bloody Butcher Red because there's a lot of toffee to it. But I'm digging it quite a bit. This is good.
That's great.
I can tell by the way you said that. That's why he's been quiet. was that drink right there? Which now I'm jealous of. But yeah, hey, Bloody Butcher goes with a lot of things. It's an extra punch of flavor.
Right.
Yeah. I'm really liking the Bloody Butcher with this. This is pretty good.
Nice. It's got to be bold.
To go. Go ahead, Brian.
Oh no, I'm just saying it's got to be a bold whiskey for this. Otherwise, you'll just be tasting that vermouth.
Yeah. I was tempted to go Iron Root on this one, and then I came back to the Matty Gladden with that high rye, and the way that that for us, when we were doing our whiskey of the year last year, that turned out to be one of the ones that was, and it's because even at the proof it was at, the flavor stood up to all these different cast strength whiskeys we were putting it up against, and it just it carried right over. And so to me, that one is fantastic in a cocktail because of the way it stands out.
Absolutely.
The flavors come through. Yep.
So you're asking me about.
So how have you seen the equipment change? The tools?
Yeah.
How have you seen that change?
It basically goes from, using something that was intended for something else to then becoming specialized. So actually, I'm going to dig in my cabinet one more time.
Yeah, no problems there. Little cheers to everyone out there. A little cheers to Amy behind the camera tonight.
Yeah. And if Amy wants to come around and get in front of the camera, that's fine too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You hear that, sweetie? Oh, she says she's not fit for receiving company. So here's an example. Here's a goblet from the 1870s.
Right.
Okay. And so if you look at like when absinthe is really starting to become big, and they even have this, there's some impressionist paintings. A lot of times they're called, the absinthe drinker drinking absinthe, something of that nature. At that point, you'll see it in bars being served in just a regular goblet, something like this. And this is something that came with any kind of, set of glass that anybody might have. And they would use it to serve absinthe in. We've drank absinthe in it, and it's great. But then that transforms into the absinthe glass. Mm. Okay, so then you had this, by the end of the century, you've got these purpose-made glasses where they've made the reservoir and all that, so it really works with it. And I think, in a nutshell, that's how it all changed. At the beginning of it, you're using standard wares, that might be used for anything else. And then it moves to specialized designs to the point now today we have we have special spoons, we've got special strainers, things like that. Well, even the wine glass is a perfect example. It's like they were measuring the spirits in a standard wine glass that you'd find on your dining room table. But then now these days, of course, we've got the measures that we can it's got 1 ounce, 2 ounce, ounce and a half, and we pour it. We measure it that way, but for them, they were just kind of using standard equipment of the day to measure and mix. Same with glasses; they would just mix between glasses, like large bar glasses. And one of the things that bartenders notoriously could do is these just beautiful big arcs of from one to another glass and things like that. We have very few bartenders like that anymore. But again, it was just. It was just kind of standard gear to start with, and then it got specialized for the bartender's trade.
Okay.
Specialized, I mean.
Sure. So, on a historical note, during that period, what kind of impact did the Civil War have on cocktails and whatnot, the development? Or, I know, especially with the South, there would have been a real constriction on the ingredients used because of what all was going on there. But did that have any kind of impact or change the direction of how cocktails went?
That is a really interesting point. And it's worth mentioning too, I think, that Jerry Thomas's book, and he was the first to write down the bartender's trade. It's one of many that we have now, but he was really the first to write down the trade. But that came out in 1862. So that's right in the thick of the Civil War.
Right.
And we don't really pass into another period of mixology after that, but we did have changes in the tax laws that changed the way the spirits were produced. And Alan's on here. I got to definitely give credit to him for helping me to understand that. But, when they changed the way the distillation was taxed, that's when basically it happened that, you either had to go big, go illicit, or quit, and again, I am repeating Alan's research here, but they would tax you based on the capacity that you could, they would tax you based on the capacity if your still was run 24/7.
Yep.
Basically.
Okay.
That wasn't the case before. It was just a farm product, and that's what, I was interpreting out there at Locust Grove with the small farm distillery out there. It was just another way to process your crops, but then they changed the tax law in response to the Civil War and all that. So that changed the way that spirits were produced and consumed. And so the mixology didn't necessarily change, but the nature of who was producing spirits and how did. And probably that ultimately did lead to changes. It's one of those things too where it probably led to changes you didn't realize because they're using the same methods, but the products you're getting are different.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So the recipes might have been the same, but what you're working with had changed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds tasty too. I can see why you were concerned about that one being drunk too fast.
You're right. Yeah, well, that was the thing. Is like if we mix that one first, we're going to be mixing the next one in 5 minutes. So.
Yeah, it was. It was. That's kind of
or not at all, actually.
I was going to say, I think we might could have worked through 3 or 4 because I could suck all these down pretty quick.
You're right.
Yeah.
I'm holding my pace on these, especially for a Wisconsinite. This is
so with your research and the history of it, where are you at with Manhattan made with rye versus Manhattan made with bourbon?
Oh Lord, that's a good question. I'm going to be honest. I'm a Kentuckian. I like being a Kentuckian. I love bourbon, but a perfect rye Manhattan is a really special thing, and maybe it's even just because I don't get it as often. I don't have. I just don't generally have as many ryes around as I have bourbons.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I do is kind of like a special thing. And the best Manhattan I ever had was made with rye. It was actually my wife's stepfather made it. And it was just impeccable. And so, yeah, I would have to actually say, even though I'm a bourbon guy in general, yeah, rye is the way to go.
Nice.
Okay.
What's been
we
some
do
of
the
the
Manhattan episode coming up. We're going to do one about this, and we're just going to work through whatever whiskeys we have in the cabinet. And we're just going to try a little bit of everything and see where we get.
That is the best experimentation. I like the way. I'm already excited for this show.
I'm having a lot of fun experimenting tonight because I mean, there's a huge difference between these two, and
yes.
And the old Overholt did not do what I thought it was going to do. It became lighter and very refreshing, nice. Which I did not expect that to do that. But this, this Bloody Butcher, it is. I think I put it in the chat. It is thick dessert.
Gotcha.
And
yeah.
It's really unfortunate because it's really good.
Well, you can see why you would not want to use a sweet vermouth in this.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
yeah.
Even I can. Wow.
It's like we started trying that and did it a few times, and it was disgusting.
I was gonna say it'd be like it's like candy in a glass. It just
but not in a good way.
Right. Yeah, I'm not a big candy person, so to me it's like that's too sweet. Yuck.
Right.
But no, this is brilliant. But yeah, Mike, that's what I've been telling you about cocktails the last few weeks, man. It's been fun because there's so many avenues of exploring and playing around that you can.
I know, but my problem is I know me, and I will go down that avenue and I won't turn, right? Because I know what happens. So I keep myself limited, and I'll branch out a little bit here and there. But I do.
Right.
I enjoy a lot of Manhattans. I didn't do this for several months, but I'll pre-make them and put them in the fridge and then take them out. And oh man, that just makes a really nice Manhattan. But it's dangerous, to do it that way. But boy, is it convenient.
I was gonna say I've done some mini barrel aging with Manhattans before, and that's been incredible as well.
Okay.
But, so I'm curious to go back to kind of the start of this period. You're talking about coming out of this, punch was like coming into the punch was the big thing. And I think was it your second episode? You did that Mississippi punch.
Yes.
I made, and that was absolutely fantastic, man. That one, I'm going to be repeating that one a lot because it was killer.
That's a good. How
much variation have you seen in punch recipes that you've researched or come across? Coming through there, how much did that? I've always been curious because it's like, reading James Madison used to keep a bowl of rum punch by the bedside. That was like first thing you wake up in the morning, he'd pull a ladle of punch to get out of bed. Yeah. So, there's kind of standard elements, and in the 17th century, it started out really simple, and honestly, I really like those. And they kind of use limes over lemons. Of course, we eventually
move more in the lemon direction. But some of those can be really nice and refreshing. And I'm not as much, I haven't done as many punches as I have like this stuff, but you start to kind of hit a stride by the time you're partway through the 18th century. And that stride doesn't really go away. And so really you even get into the mid-19th and later, and you'll have basically the same form of a punch recipe. Like there'll be like the Fish House punch, 69th regiment of this punch and all that. And it'll be more or less the same. And they'll still print it. But it'll be right next to a recipe that's like the Mississippi punch that we tried. And all that. And so it's like I think the term started to evolve more than the specific drink did. It's like, so those recipes are still punch and they're still kind of trying to work with the same idea, but then the definition of punch gets broadened into these individual portions, into what now, if you were served it today at a bar, you would call a cocktail. But they were still they were calling it punch. It was just following the trends of the day. And so once you get to the mid to late 18th century, certain things have kind of gotten where they were going to get. And the variance would probably be with the spirits that were available to make them. People's skills increased, the quantities increased, and then, of course, by the time you get to the 1860s, the tax laws changed, and then that changed the nature of the spirits you had available to you. So you might use the same recipe in 1780 that you're using in 1870, but the results will be different.
How much have you seen region plays a difference in the variations on cocktails from that time period? Because I know we're talking about, rivers and railroads, trade and everything, how much it's growing and progressing, but still, when you start looking even from state to state, what the types of crops that are grown, the things that, farm distillers are producing and doing, there's so much variation and contrast. Does that come into play? Is that a big factor as well?
That's not something I've explored a whole lot. But what I can say is that the more that transportation, the faster transportation got, the more standardized things became. And so you have Jerry Thomas traveling all over the United States. He worked in New York and he worked in California and all that. And so you have this greater communication between regions. And so people are doing the same things more places than maybe they had been before. That's kind of a hallmark of the Victorian period. So I'm sure that's really difficult to get at. But I think the lesson is that this is a period where goods and information are traveling very, very quickly. And so you saw less variance during this period than maybe you did the one prior. It's really how I would answer that question. Like I was saying, whiskey is not the star of the show. In a lot of these early manuals, even though we love it, it's a connoisseur thing now. It doesn't seem like it was more like a workaround in the earlier manuals and things like that. They were very preoccupied with cognac as kind of a center stage kind of thing, and that kind of thing. Something you might have imported.
And I asked that because I'm here in South Carolina, and I've been the last several months doing research historically on distilling and drinks here within this state. And I know coming from colonial times, it was really rum and brandy, and obviously the fortified wines, Madeira and port and stuff were kind of the king early on before kind of the grain whiskeys really started to take hold. But so just curious to see how that develops through time, the change in the type of spirits they're using and all that. So,
well, it's like, I think there was a prestige to the imported stuff. And so there was a prestige to using that. And so the locally produced stuff, it's like you can get it anywhere. It's produced on a farm. That's kind of more the workaround at one point. That started changing eventually. Again, I think a lot due to the tax laws. And then you're dealing with manufacturing and things like that. It started to be not just such a, commodity that your neighbor made. Yeah, so it's a little bit, and that's why it's exotic now. And whenever we're at the small farm distillery at Locust Grove, that's what I always try to tell people. It's like it's exotic now because not everybody does it. There's this whole There's this licensing, there's all this expense and all that. It's like for these people, this is just part of the farm. You know, there's nothing fancy. It's not mystical. This is just part of crop processing, and that's just not how we think of it. And that's in the Victorian period is when it started to change.
And I find that interesting because, like, here in South Carolina, you have Charleston, the big port city. There's a tremendous amount of wealth due to slavery at the time period. And so it's easy to get goods in, and then those slowly have to, make their way inland towards like a Kentucky or Tennessee or somewhere like that.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Once you got the railroad, though.
Interesting. Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's
where it all takes off.
Yep.
Ooh. Sorry, they came in and out. They were mixing up something. I had to go check on them for a second. And he made his own kind of like concoction of things, and you know what? It turned out pretty good. But he was working hard at it, so I can't.
You don't even know what you're getting at this point.
I don't know. But there's a lemon in it and some mint. I feel like he took the blackberry and made it like lemon from the last one. So I feel like he did the bourbon smash with a lemon.
There you go.
That's what happened here.
Well, that's the neat thing about all these. It's like you go between all these manuals or amongst all these manuals, and they have the same title and they're all the same idea, but everybody's got their own little take on it. And what one person calls fancy, the other one just calls a standard. And so.
Wow. Okay, so I'm just gonna say it. As far as like, I know Ben's been playing around with stuff. I haven't been so much with cocktails lately, just because most of the time they get kind of sugary, and then I'll get like a hangover the next day. But usually it's soda that does that, not a mixed drink like this. These are pretty damn tasty, and the bars, or at least around here, could learn something from the show this evening. I'm kind of feeling embarrassed for them. I'm just gonna say it right now. I think that, and that's being vaguely. I'm kind, because I've been unimpressed by a lot of drinks I've had lately, and the 3 or 4 I've had this evening have been really, really damn tasty. So we're past the 5-minute mark. They were fucking delicious.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that.
That's so far the 2 I've made from your show have been absolutely fantastic, and then what we've made tonight, absolute repeaters for me. So
awesome! Yeah, I appreciate that.
They're great.
Well, we've got the Brandy Sangaree coming up. I don't know when it's going to air, but that was the one that really clinched it for me. When you make that, you'll be Victorian all the way.
All right.
That was good. That was going to be my next question too. Was about was there one that you've made that hooked you like it? So that's the one. That was the one. Yeah. Okay. It was Brandy Sangaree, made with the old Clifty Hoosier apple brandy. It's just perfect. Like I think I said earlier in the show, it's literally like drinking velvet. You've got some sugar, but not too much, dissolved in water. You got that ice and the old Clifty brandy in there. You mix it up, and it's neat because you take a teaspoon of ruby port and you drop it over top. You don't mix it. You just drop it over top of that brandy and sugar and ice. And you just watch it kind of filter down through it. And you grate a little bit of nutmeg on top of it, and it's just one of those amazing. I seldom have them because I don't want to waste the brandy. I don't want to get too used to it.
Speaking of, I just about finished off that bottle of apple brandy I have, the Clifty from Allen, making that punch, and I've got to get another bottle in now.
Yeah. Yeah. We got to make a trip every once in a while.
Right. And for anybody out there watching, if you want to try some apple brandy, forget Calvados, get Allen's, get the Spirits of French Lick, the Clifty Hoosier apple brandy. That stuff is absolutely fantastic. Yeah. It really is.
It is. I mean, his name gets mentioned a lot, and it's for good reason. We are friends with him. That's not a secret, but it's really, really good. And it's almost, if you're going to buy a bottle, go buy 2 bottles, because you're going to go through it really quick.
Yep.
It's worth
it's
the price.
Very versatile. It's a lot of fun. Throwing that in on an apple cider on top of that, or God, if you start getting into putting that in cocktails, you're going to go through bottles and bottles of that stuff. And then apparently there's a bottled and bond coming out of that.
Yep. Make the punch, Mike. Make the punch.
Ben,
Well, I'll say too, it's like, I'd always loved apple orchards. I'd always been, really all I've ever wanted to be was a 19th century farmer. And it was working with a distillery, working with Alan, and then tasting the Hoosier apple brandy that made me decide that the whole course I wanted to correct and take was it's like, I want to raise heritage apples so I can help make this happen.
Nice.
So what are some of the varieties that you've discovered or you're looking at wanting to do?
I don't own an orchard right now, but I do work with a lady who raises almost all heritage apples. And I think it's neat because I think at this point we've got everything that Jefferson had that you can do right now. And so the Spitzenberg is a really special one. Buddy Aiden Pemberton of ours is a big cider guy, makes some amazing ciders and stuff, and also collects them. And we had a single varietal of Spitzenberg, and it was just like drinking champagne. It was great. And so that's what I'm very enthusiastic about. The Albemarle Pippin is, of course, a treasure. The Harrison has recently been rediscovered and recultivated. And I don't know if we have that one out yet, but that's a good one. And so, it's like it's all about learning. And then the variety is important, too. So it's like, when you made brandy back in those days, you had all the produce of the farm going into brandies. And so having a little bit of everything, I think, is in my mind, is the way to go. And we did a mashed apple brandy at Locust Grove a couple years ago. I think it was 2018. And there is a video out there about it on Townsend's. If you can find it, it's I think it's called Apple Mashed Brandy or something like that. But I called up an orchard in Georgetown and just said, "Can you give us 4 bushels a seconds?" And that's what they did. And we wheeled them down there and mashed them up, made brandy out of it. And it was some pretty special stuff. Nice. It was like 120 proof white spirit, which I expect would just be like raw. But it rolled over your tongue. And as it did, you just got like this pop of fruit flavor. So
now I got a question for the guys, because I know they had it. And this is so that we don't sound like we're all fluffing Alan this evening. Is what about the, I think it was the 1776 from Virginia distilleries, the apple brandy they had?
Are you talking about Catoctin Creek?
Oh, Catoctin Creek. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that was
many whiskeys this year, folks.
Yeah, that was not an apple brandy. That was a traditional grape style brandy.
I don't care. I was just saying, and I know that they were. Oh, I thought they were working on another one that they were doing there. I thought that one might have like a little bit of play as well too. That's all.
It could definitely work in some cocktails, no doubt. It's a fantastic brandy of its own right. So definitely. Alan says to fluff away, Patty.
You're getting fluffed enough. That's good enough for you.
He ought to be ready to go at this point.
Oh, wow.
So,
all right, well, I want to ask, what are some of your favorite whiskeys or spirits to use for your cocktails?
Okay, I'm going to do it again. I love the Lee Sinclair 2-year. It's almost gone now, but I've got a little bit left, and I like the grain forwardness of it, and I feel like that's a true thing from the 19th century, is to really be able to know you're drinking something from grain. I love Jephthah Creed, but I don't tend to mix it. I like it so much, I just drink it as it is, and I can't afford it very often. They have the whole Bloody Butcher corn thing going on. And I really like the grain forward musty flavor that comes from Jephthah Creed, but I don't mix it much. Old Bardstown from the Willett Distillery is perfect for these cocktails, and whichever version of it you get, quite honestly, whether you get the 80 proof, the 100 proof, it's all great. And it's affordable. It's really approachable. It's like $20 a bottle, but it's Old Bardstown from the Willet Distillery, and it really just flows along with a lot of these cocktails. I love doing it in a mint julep. There weren't a whole lot of mint juleps in the Victorian period, honestly, that called for whiskey or bourbon. The first one I think we know of is Henry Clay. Wrote down his mint julep recipe, I think around 1847, and he was the first one to actually call for bourbon, and he was an anomaly as far as the ones who were writing it down. But Old Bardstown goes along really well for that. Other whiskeys, what do I have here tonight? Honestly, there's nothing wrong with Evan Williams.
There's not a damn thing wrong with it.
Yeah, there's not. I really enjoy the stuff, quite honestly. It's solid. It's honest. It has a good flavor to it, and it'll get you where you're going. Rye-wise, again, I'm really trying to better understand 19th century rye, and so I've very intentionally not commented on that so far. So that's an exploration thing for me. The same thing with Scotch. There's Scotches I like. I think I tend to default to Glenfiddich. And depending on the cocktail, it can have mixed results. Like we tried doing Scotch with the Manhattan we had tonight. It wasn't that good. So yeah, just kind of.
Are there other people like yourself doing this that you guys communicate or that you can bounce some of the ideas off of?
I'm sure there are, but I don't know who. Well, yeah, there are. There is one. The Civil War Digital Digest.
Okay.
His name is Will Eichler. He runs the Civil War Digital Digest, and I think you've got to subscribe and get it special because he goes around. He does a lot of great educational shows about the Civil War on all kinds of different topics. Really neat finite stuff. Like there was one I loved a couple of weeks ago where he did one with a specific set of uniforms that was left over from a specific soldier. He started as a cadet, went into an officer, and it was neat because I love it when you see Union guys in gray and Confederate guys in blue. I always love it when it gets mixed up like that. And it was one of those. It's like early on, he was a Union guy, but he actually had a gray uniform. Then he had his later blue junior officer's uniform. But he's doing a show also called The Tasting Room. But I think you got to be subscribed. And I don't know if it's like a Patreon thing, but since he puts out stuff for school kids, he doesn't put the alcohol programming out front and center. Okay. Yeah, but it was funny because he actually contacted me. I've been working on my bar in the basement and all that, and I had it going on. And he sent me a message one day, and he said, "Are we working on the same thing?" And he sent me his bar, and it's like, damn it, we had gotten the same lumber from the hardware store even. I was like, how did that happen? It turned out we exchanged clips, and they're two very different shows. And we're talking about doing some collaboration shows.
Cool.
That would be great.
Crossover.
That'd be fantastic because your screens could be right next to each other. It could look like they were pairing into each other.
But no, he's the only one I really know of. It's Will Eichler. It's the Civil War Digital Digest, and it's called The Tasting Room. It's kind of a subcategory of his main channel.
Okay. A little question from the chat. Thoughts on tea-inclusive cocktails or punch?
I don't have any. I don't like to mix caffeine and alcohol, and so I just haven't done it. I feel like I should, but I haven't.
Nothing wrong with that.
Oh, Amy reminded me that there was a syrup that our friend Julia Madsen made, who runs Bingley's Teas, that was tea based, but that syrup was very good in a whiskey sour.
Okay.
Yeah.
I could see that. Sorry, I'm getting lost in too much. I don't usually drink cocktails. It's usually straight booze for me. It is, and what happens when I drink cocktails is exactly what's happening now. The same thing when we had gin drinks with Fred Swanson.
You start speaking in cursive.
It's getting to me.
Like you've been thinking in cursive, right, Mike? As you commented earlier.
No, my thoughts have been slurred.
I'm ready to make number 3. Let's move on.
In general, I start with because I like just appreciating the spirit for what it is. A lot of times, so it's like I'll start with a cocktail and then I'll move into just something basic, because they do just slide down too easy.
Yes.
Yeah. there's a danger element to enjoying these.
Yeah.
But so I saw recently you were joined a historical society there in Kentucky. Is that right? Mm-hmm. So what all else are you in, if you want to share with everybody what all else you're involved in here outside of just the Victorian Barroom?
Yeah, I'm by day. I'm the executive director of the Shelby County Historical Society, and that is Shelby County, Kentucky. There's a Shelby County in about every state, which makes it hard to find our website. But we're ShelbyKYHistory.org. It's a wonderful group of people, really neat county, and it's just been a neat journey to kind of get involved there. And I hope that I was the right thing they needed when I needed them. And so it's actually, I don't work full time for them. I work part time because then also I'm working on these other projects like the Victorian Barroom and also on the orchard and things like that. It's like all I really ever wanted to be was 19th century farmer. And partway through last year, I started thinking, it's like, what do I want to do that I've put next to no effort in? It's like, well, I haven't been putting in the time to learn this stuff. And so I was lucky enough to be taken on as kind of by a mentor who's been raising heritage apples almost as long as I've been alive. Mm-hmm. So that's another thing that I'm doing is also working on that orchard and hope to start my own one day. I came from, before this, I was the program director at Historic Locust Grove in Louisville, Kentucky. And I think our biggest, we did a lot of good things there, actually. Honestly, we got a lot done, but the small farm distillery project was one of the most special, and that's how I met Alan. He came to our opening day, and but it's a functional recreation of an early 19th century small farm distillery. No spirits are produced there because it's not licensed. But when we go down there, we do a demonstration. We go through the whole mashing process for real. And we usually are doing whiskey. Occasionally you'll catch us doing brandy when we can. And there's also been this Absinthe project. We got a lot of other things that we're thinking about right now. But I stayed engaged with that when I resigned my official position at Locust Grove. And so I'm still helping to manage the small farm distillery project. And at least once a month during the cool months, you can actually come down there and see us doing a mashing demonstration. And then that mash at the end of the day, like I say, we do it completely correctly, and then it will go off to a licensed distillery and be turned into what it was supposed to be. And hopefully we're working on doing kind of like very small scale bottlings. But it'll be some of the most authentic spirits that you can have.
Nice.
All right. So we're just going to mention it. If you're going to be chasing allocated bottles, F that. What I just heard was something you should be paying attention to if you're going to be chasing allocated things.
Yes.
Chase something like that.
Right.
Well, assuming all of the money would go back to Locust Grove too, correct?
Yes.
So another reason to go and chase something like that, because it all goes to a good source instead of some old guy's pockets.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's I don't think I'm not being paid right now. So I mean, maybe I will sometime. But we go down there and do it for the love of it. And I've been a part of that place for 22 years plus. And yeah, it's a really special site. And if we can help support it with these really interesting and make some really authentic 19th century spirits along the way and help people to experience that, then yeah, we're really proud to do it.
So tell me a little bit about the, you've been involved with Musée de Vino, if I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah, Musée de Vino.
And I know Alan's been helping develop an absinthe that they originally, from that period in that place. Yeah. There in Indiana. So
yeah, that was Alan's research to kick that off. He found two mentions, two cases of documentation of people making absinthe in Switzerland County, Indiana, in the 1830s. And so it was called Switzerland County because those were French Swiss settlers that came to that area. And so we got to talking about this and about, we had the small farm distillery project at Locust Grove. It's like, this is a perfect place to kind of work on it. But then also we had been working with this amazing little historic site called Musée des Vinoges. And if you're passing through, you've got to see it. It's not the big grand house. It's a one room on the bottom French colonial style farmhouse. Mm-hmm. And, there's a loft upstairs where there's some bedrooms. And so it was built around 1828, and it was the home of Jacob and Charlotte Weaver. And they were just regular folks. Charlotte was French Swiss. Jacob came from New York, and they had lived in New York, and they moved out there to Switzerland County about that time. And they lived somewhere else first, and then they moved into the house at Vinoge, which has been restored, and it's been a labor of love. It was almost burned as an exercise by the fire department before they realized what was in there. And so it's like, okay, so we've got Alan's research on the absinthe. We've got the distillery at Locust Grove, and we've got this historic site that was a farm in the 1830s when this absinthe was made. So it's like we got us all together with Kentucky Artisan Distillery also, because at that time they were taking our mash and doing the fermentation and distillation of it for us.
Cool.
And we decided we're all going to get together to do this. And one of the neat things about it was too, the yeast that the mash was fermented on came from botanicals in the garden at Vinoge. So they've got a historical garden.
Nice.
On a place that was a farm at the time this absinthe was made. Alan harvested the yeast that was growing on the leaves of the botanicals, and we used it to ferment the mash with no assistance. There was no superfood or anything went into that. It was that yeast did the work. There's only ever going to be a little bit of this stuff, and it's going to be amazing. But yeah, Vinoge is great. Donna Weaver is the director up there. It was her and her husband saved the place. Check out the website, Instagram, Facebook, and all of that. I think they're open certain times right now. There's some events throughout the year that we're trying to get restarted right now, and it's a whole different historic house experience. So often it's the big grand house that gets saved. This is just a little farmhouse from some regular folks, and it's a great bunch of folks that keep it alive.
Sweet. I need to get up there and visit some more of this historical stuff for sure.
Yeah,
because it sounds right up my alley.
Absolutely, yeah. Touch base and we'll do it together.
This just sounds like something they should be doing. We have a section here where it's a heritage show where they took some of the kind of similar time period buildings and recreated them and have like a whole little village and stuff. And I can't believe they're not doing something similar to some of the stuff you're doing there, just to, I don't know, incorporate everything and kind of create a deeper connection to everything that's going on in the area as to what was already doing there beforehand. It seems simple, but thank you for doing it there, because usually when people start at some place, it tends to flourish in other places and other areas too.
It's all just about having the people and the passion. And I think what I've been seeing as far as like historic sites and things like that, the skills are what's really appealing to people these days. And so the distillery stuff, it was the perfect thing to hook people into caring about the whole project. Because I think the further people get removed from the skills of the past, the more fascinating they are. It's like, I don't think 20 years ago I could have, drawn interest chopping wood. But it's like, I'll be out chopping wood and people want to gather around and watch. It's like, I'm glad they're interested, but probably shouldn't stand that close.
More people need to do it. Good work.
Yeah. That's a great way to think and work out problems.
It is. That was for me in high school. That was like, I played football, so that was post football season workout through the wintertime, and then you get stressed from school, you go out there chopping wood for the evening, and that was a great stress reliever, no doubt.
Absolutely, and you're getting something done.
Right. No, seriously, thank you for your passion and just the information you brought here tonight and what you're sharing, because for me, I have a deep appreciation for people who have put their life into, put their research and their mind into, uncovering and bringing out this stuff from history that, most of us would have forgotten or passed over, and we get to be enlightened on this and educated and I think made richer, all for it. And it's been fantastic. So,
I appreciate you guys having me on. It's like, you do these things, you delve into it, and a lot of times it's like you get to things like, does anybody really care? I really appreciate you guys, having me on and talking to me.
I think it's fantastic, and what you're doing, and as you're going to continue to build like a library of drinks and cocktails and experiences, I feel like that's you mentioned it before. It's like an evening. There's a lot of people that could take some of these drinks, 2 or 3 drinks, and create an evening experience based off of what you're doing. I mean, I've already thought about it with what just happened here with me this evening. So I think there's going to be some other people that are going to take a look at what you're doing, and like you said, it creates another experience to it. I hope people take that to the next level for what's going on, because
awesome. Well, it's like you can do it, and that's the thing. It's something new, it's something different, and you can really make it happen yourself.
Oh, and I think for me, it's like just even going out and enjoying a simple cocktail at a restaurant or a bar or somewhere. When you know the historical context, it kind of builds a bridge to the past. Right. And for me, it builds a deeper appreciation for what you're enjoying or what you're doing. It's to me, it's like a similar story. This is, I guess, a parallel. Was in Charleston this past weekend. We visited. There's this become now a very famous barbecue place called Rodney Scott's, and he's featured on a little Netflix documentary. And so we came back, and my wife had not seen it, so I made her watch the documentary last night. And having the understanding of where he built that restaurant from, what he came from, you got a deeper appreciation of the value of the hard work and everything that went into it. And so it's the same thing, enjoying these cocktails when you know the historical context and the bridge from that time period to now. It just builds this deeper appreciation for what has gone into it. And I don't know, you feel like this multi-generational tie to everything. That for me is why I love history so much. But
yeah, you can talk all day about events and the historical headlines and was this right, was this wrong, was this good, was this bad? But it's like until you understand it in the context of a life experience, that these are just regular people living their lives.
Right.
With these big headlines in the background, then to me, you're not really getting history. And what better bridge between people than, food and drink?
Yeah. And that for me, that's what history is. It's not dates and numbers. It's people and their stories. And, yeah.
And food and drink have been a wonderful connection between then and now. I'm just at any point between people.
Right.
So. But like we were saying, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you guys. It's been a blast.
Appreciate it enough.
Absolutely.
What you're putting out is fantastic. Make sure you stop over there and check out what's coming out too over the next couple episodes and the next, let's say, several years, because
thank you.
So
we're working on it.
People making cocktails, there is something to be learned from what just happened this evening.
Right.
Very simple, very old. A lot of work put into it and a lot of research, but damn, has it paid off. So, so cheers to everyone. Thank you very much, Brian, for stopping out and coming on the show with us. Everyone else, you have a good evening, and we will see you next week. Cheers, everyone.
See you guys. Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Let's get into it. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, I didn't shut it off yet. So